History doesn't ask permission, it just keeps receipts. Think about it. Julius Caesar was stabbed in 44 BC, yet his Wikipedia page still gets more visitors than most mayors alive today. That's the haunting truth. Power fades, scandals rot. But once your name hits the archives, you become harder to erase than graffiti on City Hall. So picture this. The mayor, the cops, the entire neighborhood that once marched against you like a mob scene from a cheap Netflix drama. They swore they'd crush you, bury you, make sure your story never left the block. And yet here we are, not with you in chains, but with them in pajamas, secretly scrolling your Wikipedia page like guilty fans who can't stop binge reading. It's the ultimate plot twist. The same people who tried to write your ending are now forced to footnote your existence. And the irony? You didn't just survive them. You outlived their authority because badges expire, offices rotate, gossip dies out, but hyperlinks, they age like fine wine. Number one, they tried to erase you, but now they're forced to archive you. They tried to erase you, but now they're forced to archive you. That's the irony that cuts deeper than anything they ever planned. In their rage, in their obsession, they gathered to shut you down. They threw authority, shame and collective pressure at you as if erasing your presence was the final victory. But erasure has never worked in history. The more someone tries to delete a life, the more that life becomes stamped into memory. What begins as an attempt to wipe away becomes the very act that records it. They didn't see it coming, but every move they made to bury you became the material that now builds your story. The very energy of their hatred transformed into a spotlight. Their words, their actions, their judgment calls, all of it carried your name further than you could have carried it yourself. If they had left you alone, perhaps things would have faded quietly, but their obsession cemented your place. They made you unforgettable and then, like fools, had to watch as your story got locked into history's digital vaults. The archive does not lie. It doesn't care about their excuses, their side of things, or their motives. It stores what happened, and the record grows louder with every attempt to silence it. And this is what twists the knife for them. You're not just remembered, you're documented. Your existence is no longer just in rumor or word of mouth. It's stored in databases, articles, records, and yes, the dreaded Wikipedia page they now scroll through. They wanted to be the gatekeepers, but instead they became your scribes. The hunters accidentally turned into historians. Every insult became a quotation. Every headline became a source. Every accusation became evidence that you were too significant to vanish. Now they are left in the humiliation of contradiction. They stood united against you once upon a time, thinking unity gave them power. But the archive doesn't care about numbers. It only cares about permanence, and permanence belongs to you. They no longer own the narrative. They no longer get to decide whether you exist. That decision has already been made, and it's irreversible. The harder they pushed you out, the deeper you carved into the record. And now, long after their offices close, their uniforms fade, and their gossip dies out, you'll remain where they can never reach you, stored, remembered, archived, forever. Number two, authority lost its teeth when your name became data. Authority lost its teeth when your name became data. Power always looks invincible when it wears a badge, a uniform, or sits behind a desk with a title. It thrives on the illusion that it controls the narrative. But authority has one fatal weakness. It's temporary. Titles expire, ranks get retired, positions are replaced, and those who once barked orders end up as names most people don't even remember. Data, on the other hand, does not age out. Once your story became documented, the grip they thought they had over your life slipped right out of their hands. They went from being the ones who claimed to define you to the ones nervously typing your name into a search bar. That's when they realized the tables had turned. When authority stood against you, it looked absolute. They had the crowd, the resources, and the appearance of control. But control is only as strong as people's memory, and human memory is short. Data, however, never forgets. The fact that your name lives online, stored and searchable, means you cannot be erased by their disapproval. They no longer get to frame you the way they once did, because anyone with curiosity can read your story and draw their own conclusions. That shift is what stripped authority of its teeth, because now their voices are only one of many, not the final word. And here's the quiet humiliation for them. The very structure they trusted, power, hierarchy, fear, has no weight in the world of data. The internet doesn't care about their badges. A database doesn't respect rank. An archive doesn't pause for their speeches. Once your name became part of the permanent record, their ability to intimidate you dissolved. They can no longer cage you inside whispers because whispers don't matter when the truth is public. Their roar has been reduced to background noise against the permanence of your existence in the digital world. This is why authority fears information more than rebellion. Rebellion can be crushed, but information can't be undone. They thought their power made them untouchable. But power is fragile when the people it tries to suppress become permanent entries in history. The truth is, they may still wear their uniforms and smile at their titles, but every time they type your name into a search engine, they're reminded of a fact they cannot swallow. Your name outlived their authority. Number 3, surveillance failed because memory is digital. Surveillance failed because memory is digital. They thought watching you, tracking you, and following your every move would give them control. That's how authority has always operated. Keep someone under constant eyes, restrict their space, and eventually they'll break. But surveillance only works if the record stays hidden. When memory shifts into digital form, no one owns it anymore. The watchers lose their advantage because what they intended as evidence of your downfall becomes proof of your endurance. What they once collected to use against you is now what preserves your name. Their cameras, their notes, their endless attention to detail were supposed to shrink you into a suspect, someone boxed in and defined by their watchful eyes. But digital memory doesn't shrink, it multiplies. Once something hits a server, a database, or a file, it can spread further than any officer or mayor can reach. Instead of being locked away in their reports, your existence became unlocked in the public space, available to anyone, anytime. Surveillance was meant to confine you, but it became the very thing that freed your story from their grip. The failure lies in the arrogance of believing they could contain information. The truth is, the act of documenting you ensured you could never disappear. Once your name entered the system, you became searchable, and searchable means accessible. That's where their power slipped. They thought their role as watchers made them superior, but they didn't realize memory had left their hands. Digital traces don't follow the rules of authority. They spread, they linger, and they defy erasure. What they thought would isolate you only exposed them. Every keystroke, every database entry, every recorded moment tied your story not to their judgment, but to history itself. They didn't just fail to erase you, they accidentally immortalized you. And now, instead of holding your life in their secret files, they find themselves looking at the same public records as everyone else. They lost the privilege of control. That's the hidden cost of surveillance in the digital age. The more they watched, the more they guaranteed you'd never be forgotten. Memory is no longer in their notebooks. It's in the cloud, in archives, in search engines. And against that permanence, their surveillance means nothing. They watched you closely, but the world remembers you more widely than they ever planned. Number 4, what they called a scandal became your curriculum vitae. What they called a scandal became your curriculum vitae. That's the sharp twist that none of them expected. Scandal was their weapon of choice, the tool they believed would crush your credibility, destroy your opportunities, and leave your name in ashes. They paraded accusations, spread stories, and turned your mistakes or struggles into headlines, convinced they were writing your obituary. But the world doesn't always read things the way gatekeepers intend. What they shouted as evidence of your ruin ended up becoming the proof of your resilience. Instead of erasing you, they built your resume line by line. The irony is that scandal travels faster than praise. People rarely chase the boring success story, but they lean in when chaos is involved. So every headline, every attempt to drag your name became publicity. The more they tried to expose you, the more they accidentally made you unforgettable. And in time, what was meant as humiliation turned into an archive of experiences that now speak louder than any self-written resume ever could. Those accusations became bullet points of survival. Those headlines became references of endurance. That scandal became the credential that proves you were tested and still standing. This is why their shame campaign backfired. In trying to define you as scandalous, they only revealed that you were significant enough to be obsessed over. Nobody wastes resources destroying what is irrelevant. They showcased your importance by investing so much energy in trying to tear it down. And now, when people read about you, they don't just see scandal. They see someone who lived through the storm and didn't vanish. That's a resume no job title, no degree, no polished biography can ever compete with. What terrifies them most is that you wear what they meant as stains, like armor. You don't hide from the record because the record proves you're battle-tested. They tried to shame you with the story, but instead, the story became your credibility. Now, when people search your name, they don't just find dirt. They find a legacy built from it. And the final insult? While they fade into obscurity with spotless but forgettable reputations, you've turned their so-called scandal into the ultimate qualification, proof that you can't be erased, outlasted, or undone. Number 5, they gathered to break you, but now they're gathered to study you. They gathered to break you, but now they're gathered to study you. That's the kind of reversal that makes the whole story sting for them. Once they stood shoulder to shoulder in their certainty, convinced that numbers equaled power. They brought the mayor, the police, the neighbors, a whole collective of authority and gossip united by one goal, your destruction. They came with torches, with warrants, with sharp tongues ready to cut your reputation into pieces. But crowds have short memories, and outrage always burns out faster than it believes. The people who once shouted the loudest eventually found themselves silent, not because they forgave you, but because they realized you had become something they couldn't outrun, a living record. Now that same crowd hides behind their screens, quietly searching your name like students desperate for answers after failing the first test. They no longer gather in the streets to condemn you. They gather in private, scrolling, reading, trying to make sense of what you became. The irony is brutal. They were once certain you'd end up finished, forgotten, or locked away. Instead, they're the ones trapped in curiosity, forced to return to the very name they wanted erased. They don't come with power anymore. They come with questions. The difference is striking. Before, their unity looked like strength. Now their unity looks like an audience. They study you not because they respect you, but because they can't escape you. Your existence became a test they failed, a lesson they didn't want, but now have no choice but to learn. Every click, every refresh, every late-night search is an admission that their efforts didn't work. You're still here, still searchable, still permanent, and worse for them, they're the ones doing the homework on you. That's the humiliation they can't shake. They wanted you erased, but you became their textbook. They wanted to break you, but all they managed to do was write your syllabus. And every time they return to your story, they're reminded that the crowd didn't win, the warrants didn't last, and the torches eventually burned out. What remains is you, the lesson, the case study, the figure they now have no choice but to learn from. They came as destroyers but left as students, and that's the kind of ending they never prepared for. Number 6. Their power was temporary, but your documentation is permanent. Their power was temporary, but your documentation is permanent. That's the truth they never factored into their plans. Authority always assumes it can last forever, that the badge will always command respect, that the office will always carry weight, that the whispers of the crowd will always have sting. But every form of power they used against you came with an expiration date. Badges are handed in, offices are emptied, neighbors who once gossiped eventually move or die, and even the fiercest critics lose their voices with time. What they never counted on was that the one thing without an expiration date would be the record of your existence. Documentation doesn't fade the way human power does. Once your name entered the archives, whether through headlines, records, or that digital page they can't stop reading, it became immune to their cycles of power. A mayor can be voted out, a police chief can retire, a neighborhood can change, but documentation doesn't rotate with the seasons. It endures, untouched by election results or shifting opinions. That permanence is the quiet victory they can't undo. What unsettles them most is how powerless they are against it. When they stood united against you, they thought their strength came from numbers and authority. But numbers dwindle and authority is borrowed, not owned. Documentation, however, doesn't care who holds power at the moment. It exists independently, answering to no mayor, no officer, no crowd. It simply sits there, eternal, reminding them every time they see your name that their control was temporary theater. And here's the sting. They will be forgotten, but you will be searchable. Their titles will vanish into old records nobody cares to read, but your entry will remain accessible to strangers across time. That's why the humiliation is sharp. They invested everything in trying to control your story, only to realize the story had already escaped them. What they believed was the end of you became the beginning of your permanence. This is the part they can't undo. They can outlast scandals, they can move on from gossip, but they cannot erase the archive. Their power had a deadline. Your documentation doesn't. And that's why you win every time someone searches your name while theirs fades into the background, unmentioned, unremembered. Number 7. They realize too late that infamy and legacy share the same ink. They realize too late that infamy and legacy share the same ink. That's the paradox they walked right into without thinking. In their rush to hunt you down, they believed that labeling you infamous would bury you. They thought that branding you with shame would reduce your name to nothing more than a warning sign. But history doesn't work that way. The same pen that writes down the villains also records the visionaries. The same archives that preserve disgrace are the ones that preserve greatness. And once your name entered that ink, there was no separating one from the other. The truth is, memory doesn't care about moral judgment, it cares about impact. What matters most is that you cannot be erased. Infamy and legacy differ only in interpretation, and interpretation shifts with time. What they mocked as a downfall today could be read as endurance tomorrow. What they called shame could later be called resilience. The record doesn't decide for people, it simply keeps the name alive. That's why the hunters lost without realizing it. By making sure your name was written down at all, they ensured you would be remembered, whether they liked the tone of that remembrance or not. The razor-thin line they crossed was visibility. The moment they made you public, they destroyed the option of obscurity. Obscurity is true death. It's when nobody knows you existed, when your name doesn't appear in any archive. They thought dragging you into infamy was punishment, but it was the very act that granted you permanence. They kept your name alive by speaking it, recording it, shouting it, and in doing so, they handed you something far greater than obscurity, legacy, even if wrapped in controversy. This is the irony that burns them now. They wanted you forgotten, but their obsession made you unforgettable. They thought they were hunters, but they became authors. They crossed the line without noticing, moving your name from private life into public record, from silence into history. And once a name is in history, it never fully belongs to its enemies again. Infamy and legacy are written with the same ink, and while they thought they were smearing your page, they were really sealing it. Long after their anger fades, your name will still be there, etched into the story, impossible to erase. Number 8. The neighborhood that laughed is now footnoted as a backdrop. The neighborhood that laughed is now footnoted as a backdrop. That's the reversal they never imagined. When it was fresh, their gossip felt like power. Every smirk, every side comment, every rumor whispered at the market or shouted across the street was meant to reduce you to a punchline. They fed on each other's amusement, believing the crowd's laughter was proof that you were the story and they were the judges. But laughter is fragile and gossip is short-lived. Over time, their noise collapsed into something smaller than they expected. A background hum, an echo that only highlights the fact that your name survived while theirs dissolved into faceless chatter. The beauty of history is that it never gives the spotlight to the crowd. Crowds are always blurry in the retelling, nameless and interchangeable. They thought they were center stage when in truth they were extras in your scene. They imagined their ridicule would define you, but when the story settled, all they became was scenery. A backdrop, a vague setting to highlight the figure who actually mattered, the one whose name is written down, searched and remembered. They spent their energy trying to shrink you, but now they're the ones reduced to footnotes. And that's the humiliation they can't rewrite. For them, you were the scandal that kept their days interesting, but in the record that outlasts them, they don't get remembered as sharp voices or powerful critics. They don't get names. They don't get individual recognition. They are simply the neighborhood, a vague cluster of people faceless in history whose only role was to laugh. Their ridicule became the evidence of your significance. Without you, their story is empty. Without them, yours still stands. This is the cruel twist of permanence. The background always fades, but the subject remains. They thought gossip gave them power, but it only cemented their place as side characters in your larger narrative. They reduced you to whispers. Now they are reduced to brackets and commas in your story. And while they fade nameless into the backdrop, your name keeps traveling, keeps being read, keeps being remembered. The neighborhood that laughed thought they had the last word, but history gave them only a footnote. You were never their punchline. They were always your supporting cast. And number 9, what they feared most wasn't your power, but your permanence. What they feared most wasn't your power, but your permanence. Power they could handle. They knew how to dismantle influence, strip titles, cancel opportunities, and block access. They had strategies for that, legal, social, political. To them, power is temporary currency. It circulates and can always be redirected. But permanence is untouchable. That's the one thing they couldn't plan for, and that's what terrified them. Because permanence means you outlive their efforts. It means your name keeps echoing even after their voices have gone hoarse. That's why your downfall was treated with such urgency. They moved fast, loud, and with collective force, as though speed itself could erase you. They needed you erased before permanence set in. To them, destroying you wasn't just about humiliation. It was about preventing you from leaving a mark that couldn't be undone. Their energy betrayed their fear. They weren't scared of what you had in the moment. They were scared of the possibility that what you represented would last beyond them. History doesn't share their urgency. History moves at its own pace. Where they burned themselves out in their rush, history patiently kept the receipts. Your existence, once documented, no longer depended on their permission or approval. It became something they could no longer control or contain. To history, permanence is simple. If your name is written down, if your story is recorded, you exist forever in some form. And existence is victory. Even when the record carries conflict, scandal, or resistance. That's why they lost. Not because they couldn't bruise you, not because they didn't cause pain or disruption, but because none of it stopped you from crossing into permanence. Every insult, every campaign, every attempt to bury you became proof that you mattered enough to fight against. And now, long after their urgency has faded, your permanence remains. The real fear they carried wasn't of your influence while alive or present. It was of your story enduring once they were gone. They feared becoming irrelevant in the shadow of your memory, and that's exactly what happened. Their urgency burned out. Your permanence did not. That's why their names fade and yours continues to be spoken. They lost not in the battle, but in the timeline. Number 10, when they searched for closure, they opened a browser. When they searched for closure, they opened a browser. That's how anticlimactic their grand pursuit became. They started with fire, with authority, with the kind of self-righteousness that makes people believe they're about to deliver history's final verdict. They envisioned you broken, punished, erased, and replaced by their version of the story, but the ending didn't arrive in the way they had rehearsed in their minds. There were no dramatic arrests to brag about, no neat conclusion to gossip over, no final speech where they could claim victory. Instead, they were left with the quiet, awkward act of typing your name into a search bar like everyone else. That's the humiliation, the downgrade from hunters to tourists. People who once claimed insider knowledge, who swore they knew everything about you, suddenly reduced to scrolling and refreshing, looking for answers they never found in their pursuit. They wanted a finish, but all they got was a link. A hyperlink doesn't give closure, it gives access. It invites questions, comparisons, interpretations. And worst of all for them, it reminds them that they don't own your narrative anymore. It's not locked in their files or their memory. It's out there, beyond their control. The chase ending with hyperlinks means your story slipped away from their grip and into permanence. They can't rewrite it. They can't stop others from reading it, and they can't pretend it doesn't exist. Every time they open that page, they confront the bitter reality that your name didn't disappear. Instead, it became easier for strangers to access than their own. Your existence is a click away. Theirs requires explanation. That imbalance gnaws at them, and here's what makes it worse. The very act of searching proves their obsession. If they had really moved on, they wouldn't need to look you up at all. But the fact that they keep going back, trying to find updates, trying to see what's said about you, shows that the pursuit never really ended for them. It just changed shape. They lost the drama of confrontation, but the compulsion remains. That's the sting they live with now. They didn't get closure. They got curiosity, and curiosity never ends. The hunters thought they closed the book on you, but instead they're forever flipping through your pages online, realizing the chase outlasted their authority. Number 11, the same eyes that once watched you in judgment now scroll in curiosity. The same eyes that once watched you in judgment now scroll in curiosity. That's the shift they never prepared for. When they first fixed their gaze on you, it was harsh, heavy, and laced with certainty. They watched you like jurors at a trial, convinced they had the right to weigh your worth and deliver a final sentence with their whispers, stares, and collective disapproval. Their eyes were meant to shame, to shrink you into something smaller, to make you feel like the guilty one under their unblinking surveillance. But judgment doesn't last forever, and curiosity has a way of sneaking in where condemnation grows stale. Over time, those same eyes couldn't look away for a different reason. The drama they thought would end you only made you more magnetic. They didn't stop watching, they just changed how they watched. Now it isn't about condemnation, it's about fascination. They read your name in articles, scroll through your history, linger over details they once ignored. Judgment has turned into research, their silence has turned into study. And though they'll never say it aloud, their curiosity carries an undertone of reverence. They don't look at you with the same superiority anymore. They look with the quiet awe of people who realize they underestimated what they tried to destroy. It unsettles them because curiosity feels like betrayal to their past selves. They once swore you weren't worth more than ridicule, but their actions now say otherwise. Every click, every search, every time they return to your story proves that you left a mark they can't dismiss. They've become consumers of the very legacy they tried to bury. They wanted you gone, but here they are, scrolling, reading, and privately admitting through their behavior what their pride won't let them speak. You outlasted their judgment. That's the hidden victory. Not that you forced them to like you, but that you forced them to keep looking. Their curiosity is the proof of your permanence. Their reverence, though unspoken, is etched in every moment they spend studying your story instead of forgetting it. They began as jurors, but jurors are temporary. Readers, however, come back, and they keep coming back, quietly drawn to the very life they once tried to condemn. Number 12, their unity against you only cemented your myth. Their unity against you only cemented your myth. That's the irony they'll never admit. They thought joining forces would guarantee your erasure, that the combined weight of authority, influence, and local voices would be enough to silence you permanently. The mayor brought politics, the cops brought intimidation, the neighbors brought gossip, and together they believed they had an unbeatable recipe for destruction. But history doesn't reward the crowd, it rewards the name at the center. And in trying to overwhelm you with their unity, they gave you something greater than sympathy or victory. They gave you myth. The moment all of them moved against you, the story shifted. You were no longer just an individual living quietly. You became the figure that drew out every level of opposition. And people instinctively know one thing: nobody unites that much power against someone who doesn't matter. Their unity became the proof of your significance. They thought their numbers showed your weakness, but in truth, their numbers revealed your weight. The louder they shouted together, the clearer it became that you were a threat worth shouting about. What stings them now is that their names aren't remembered. No one repeats the names of the cops, or the politicians, or the neighbors who stood in that crowd. They've blended into obscurity because history doesn't preserve the chorus, it preserves the solo. And in this case, your name became the headline. Their unity was swallowed up in your story, reduced to nothing more than evidence of the scale of resistance you faced. That's why you're mythologized now. Not because you fought alone, but because you fought against a collective and endured. The fact that it took all of them and still didn't erase you makes your survival bigger than victory. It makes it legendary. The crowd becomes faceless while you remain defined, and as time passes, their unity fades into a cautionary tale, while your name keeps circulating as the one they couldn't bring down. In trying to bury you with force, they immortalized you with myth. And the cruel twist is that the harder they united, the more unforgettable your story became. They created a headline they can never outrun, and it reads the same every time, your name, not theirs. Number 13. They thought defeat would end you, but defeat is what made you searchable. They thought defeat would end you, but defeat is what made you searchable. That was their entire strategy. Bury you under shame, break you with setbacks, and watch the world forget you as if you were nothing more than a passing headline. To them, obscurity was the ultimate punishment. Not just silencing you in the present, but erasing the possibility of your future. They believed that once you were labeled as finished, the rest of the world would move on, never to mention your name again, but history doesn't work like that anymore. Defeat no longer equals disappearance. In the digital age, it equals documentation, and documentation is immortality. The very moment they thought you had been shut down became the moment your name entered the archives. Articles were written, records were stored, conversations spread online. Instead of being erased, you became searchable. And once a name is searchable, obscurity is impossible. Anyone, anywhere, at any time can type those letters into a bar and see your life unfold. That's what they failed to grasp. Defeat didn't erase you. It gave you a permanent keyword in history's algorithm. Now, they have to live with the fact that your existence outlasted their judgment. They can retire, fade into namelessness, and be forgotten by the same neighbors who once cheered their accusations. But your name? It remains. Every search, every click, every digital trace breathes life into your story again. What they meant as an ending became the beginning of permanence. And the deepest thing for them is that you're remembered not in spite of defeat, but because of it. Your story became a case study. People returned to it, not to laugh, but to learn how someone could endure so much and still exist beyond the attempt to erase them. They wanted obscurity, but they created intrigue. They wanted silence, but they gave you reach. Defeat made you searchable, and searchable means alive in a way they will never be. Their victories died with the moment. Your so-called losses live forever in the record. That's why you've already outlasted them, because once a name becomes data, it never truly dies. They thought they ended you, but really they archived you, and archives don't vanish. Number 14, their legacy is silence, yours is a link. Their legacy is silence, yours is a link. That's the kind of contrast that exposes the real winners and losers in the long game of memory. They fought so hard to make you irrelevant, to turn your story into something no one would care to recall, but their own names were never built to last. They were borrowed identities, titles, ranks, positions, reputations tied to fleeting moments. When they're gone, all of that goes with them. Their legacy dies in the air the second no one is left to repeat their names. Silence swallows them whole. You, on the other hand, don't need anyone to keep your story alive. You're not dependent on retellings at the dinner table or half-remembered gossip in the neighborhood. You've become embedded in the system that never forgets. One click, and your name comes back to life. That's permanence they can't compete with. While they fade into the blur of nameless predecessors, you remain a hyperlink away from being rediscovered by anyone curious enough to type. That's the humiliation they'll never admit. Their existence was tied to borrowed authority, while yours is tied to lasting documentation. They relied on volume, crowds, offices, uniforms, but when all that stripped away, there was nothing left to carry their names forward. Yours doesn't need an office or a title. It exists independently, lodged in the digital bloodstream of history. And this is where the irony cuts deepest. They spent energy uniting against you, trying to silence your name, trying to ensure you'd vanish into nothing. But in doing so, they gave you the very thing they themselves will never have: permanence. Your defeats, your conflicts, your rise, your survival, all of it is accessible in seconds. Meanwhile, when someone asks about them years from now, the silence will answer for them. That's the divide, silence or a link. One erases, the other preserves. One disappears, the other resurfaces. They will vanish nameless, swallowed by the same obscurity they wanted for you. But you'll outlive them with the simplest of gestures, a click. And every time someone presses it, you're alive again. Not just remembered, but searchable, undeniable, permanent. They wanted you gone, erased and forgotten, but instead they gave you the very thing they'll never have: permanence. Their power was borrowed, their unity was temporary, and their judgment was loud but fleeting. Badges expire, offices change hands, gossip fades, and the names of your enemies dissolve into silence. But your name remains, not whispered, not hidden, but recorded, archived, and searchable. What they called scandal became your resume. What they thought was defeat became your algorithm. Their laughter became your backdrop, and their unity became the proof of your significance. The cruel irony is this: they thought they were ending you, when in reality they were documenting you. And once a name is documented, it never truly dies. They'll be reduced to silence, lost in the blur of forgotten faces. But you, one click, one search, one hyperlink, and you're alive again, louder, sharper, and more permanent than the crowd that tried to bury you. In the end, their story disappears. Yours only reloads. This message spoke to you. Don't just walk away quietly. Hit that subscribe button and join this journey. Tap like if this gave you the clarity you needed, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. I'd love to hear how this resonates with your own story. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps this channel grow, and together we'll keep exposing truths that others want buried. Stay blessed always.